Morning, welcome to Collins Reading Aloud Project Part 74, another 1,000 words starting now. Deprivers, deprives, depriving, deprogram, deprogrammed, deprogramming, deprogram, deprogrammed, deprogrammer, deprogrammers, deprograms, deprogramming, deprograms, depths, depthside, depthsides, depth, depthless, depths, depurant, depurants, depurate, depurated, depurates, depurating, depuration, depurations, depurative, depuratives, depurator, depurators, depuratory, deputable, deputation, deputations, depute, deputed, deputes, deputies, deputing, deputization, deputizations, deputized, deputized, deputizes, deputizing, deputization, deputizations, deputized, deputized, deputizes, deputizing, deputy, DQ, DQ'd, DQing, DQs, DQing, deracialize, deracialized, deracializes, deracializing, deracialize, deracialized, deracializes, deracializing, deracinate, deracinated, deracinates, deracinating, deracination, deracinations, deracine, deracines, derain, derained, deraining, derainment, derainments, derains, derail, derailed, derailer, derailers, derailing, derailer, derailers, derailment, derailments, derails, derange, deranged, derangement, derangements, deranger, derangers, deranges, deranging, derat, derate, derated, derates, derating, deratings, deration, derationed, deration, derationed, derationing, derations, derats, derated, deratting, deray, derayed, deraying, derays, derbies, derby, dare, derealization, derealizations, derealization, derealizations, dereco, derecos, derecognize, derecognized, derecognizes, derecognizing, derecognition, derecognitions, derecognize, derecognized, derecognizes, derecognizing, deared, deregister, deregistered, deregistering, deregisters, deregistration, deregistrations, deregulate, deregulated, deregulates, deregulating, deregulation, deregulations, deregulator, deregulators, deregulatory, derelict, dereliction, derelictions, derelicts, dereligionize, dereligionized, dereligionizes, dereligionizing, dereligionized, dereligionized, dereligionizes, dereligionizing, derepress, derepressed, derepresses, derepressing, derepression, derepressions, derequisition, derequisitioned, derequisitions, deers, derestrict, derestricted, derestricting, derestriction, derestrictions, derestricts, dirham, dirhams, deride, derided, derider, deriders, derides, deriding, deridingly, derig, derigged, derigging, derigs, daring, derringer, derringers, derisible, derision, derisions, derisive, derisively, derisiveness, derisivenesses, derisory, derivable, derivably, derivate, derivated, derivates, derivating, derivation, derivational, derivationist, derivationists, derivations, derivatization, derivatizations, derivatize, derivatized, derivatizes, derivatizing, derivative, derivatively, derivativeness, derivatives, derivatization, derivatizations, derivatize, derivatized, derivatizes, derivatizing, derive, deriver, derived, deriver, derivers, derives, deriving, derm, derma, dermabrasion, dermabrasions, dermal, dermaplaning, dermaplanings, dermapteron, dermapterons, dermas, dermatic, dermatitis, dermatitises, dermatogen, dermatogens, dermatoglyphic, dermatoglyphics, dermatographia, dermatographias, dermatographic, dermatographies, dermatography, dermatoid, dermatologic, dermatological, dermatologies, dermatologist, dermatologists, dermatology, dermatomal, dermatome, dermatomes, dermatomic, dermatomyositis, dermatophyte, dermatophytes, dermatophytic, dermatophytoses, dermatophytosis, dermatoplastic, dermatoplasties, dermatoplasty, dermatoses, dermatosis, dermestid, dermestids, dermic, dermis, dermises, dermographies, dermography, dermoid, dermoids, derms, dern, derned, dernful, dernier, derning, dernly, derns, dero, derogate, derogated, derogately, derogates, derogating, derogation, derogations, derogative, derogatively, derogatorially, derogatorily, derogatoriness, derogatory, deros, derrick, derricked, derricking, derricks, derriere, derrieres, derries, derringer, derringers, derris, derrises, derro, deros, derry, dearth, dearths, derv, dervish, dervishes, dervs, desacralization, desacralize, desacralized, desacralizes, desacralizing, desacralization, desacralize, desacralized, desacralizes, desacralizing, desagramment, desagraments, desalinate, desalinated, desalinates, desalinating, desalination, desalinations, desalinator, desalinators, desalinization, desalinizations, desalinize, desalinized, desalinizes, desalinizing, desalinization, desalinizations, desalinize, desalinized, desalinizes, desalinizing, desalt, desalted, desalter, desalters, desalting, desaltings, desalts, desand, desanded, desanding, desands, desaturation, desaturations, descale, descaled, descaler, descalers, descales, descaling, descant, descanted, descanter, descanters, descanting, descants, descend, descendable, descendant, descendants, descended, descendant, descendants, descender, descenders, descender, descenders, descendable, descending, descendings, descends, dissension, dissensional, dissensions, descent, descents, deschool, deschooled, deschooler, deschoolers, deschooling, deschoolings, deschools, descramble, descrambled, descrambler, descramblers, descrambles, descrambling, describable, describe, described, describer, describers, describes, describing, descried, descrier, descriers, descries, description, descriptions, descriptive, descriptively, descriptiveness, descriptivism, descriptivisms, descriptivist, descriptive, descriptor, descriptors, describe, described, describes, describing, descry, descrying, desecrate, desecrated, desecrator, desecrators, desecrates, desecrating, desecration, desecrations, desecrator, desecrators, deseed, deseeded, deseeder, deseeders, deseeding, deseeds, desegregate, desegregates, desegregated, desegregates, desegregating, desegregation, desegregations, deselect, deselected, deselecting, deselection, deselections, deselects, desensitization, desensitized, desensitized, desensitizer, desensitizers, desensitizes, desensitizing, desensitization, desensitized, desensitized, desensitizer, desensitizers, desensitizes, desensitizing, deserpidine, deserpidines, desert, deserted, deserter, deserters, desertic, desertification, desertified, desertified, desertifies, desertify, desertifying, deserting, desertion, desertions, desertization, desertizations, desertization, desertizations, desertless, desert, deserts, deserve, deserved, deservedly, deservedness, deservednesses, deserver, deservers, deserves, deserving, deservingly, deservingness, deservingnesses, deservings, desex, desexed, desexes, desexing, desexualization, desexualized, desexualized, desexualizes, desexualizing, desexualization, desexualized, desexualized, desexualizes, desexualizing, desabee, desabes, deshi, deshies, desi, desiccant, desiccants, desiccate, desiccated, desiccates, desiccating, desiccation, desiccations, desiccative, desicatives, desiccator, desiccators, desiderata, desiderate, desiderated, desiderates, desiderating, desideration, desiderations, desiderative, desiderativs, desideratum, desiderium, desideriums, design, designable, designate, designated, designates, designating, designation, designations, designative, designator, designators, designatory, designed, designedly, designee, designees, designer, designers, designful, designing, designingly, designings, designless, designment, designments, designs, desilver, desilvered, desilvering, desilverization, desilverized, desilverized, desilverizes, desilverizing, desilverization, desilverized, desilverized, desilverizes, desilverizing, desilvers, design, designed, designants, designances, desinant, designant, designential, designs, designing, decipients, decipiences, decipient, decipramine, decipramines, desirabilities, desirability, desirable, desirableness, desirablenesses, desirables, desirably, desire, desired, desireless, desirer, desirers, desires, desiring, desirous, desirously, desirousness, desirousnesses, decies, desist, desistance, desistances, desisted, desistance, desistances, desisting, desists, desk, desk-bound, desk-fast, desk-fasts, de-skill, de-skilled, de-skilling, de-skillings, de-skills, desking, deskings, deskman, deskmen, desk-note, desk-notes, desks, desktop, desktops, desman, desmans, desmid, desmidium, desmids, desmine, desmines, desmodium, desmodiums, desmodromic, desmoid, desmoids, desmosomal, desmosome, desmosomes, desnude, desnude, desnuded, desnuding, desnudes, desobligeant, desobligeants, desoeuvre, desolate, desolate, desolated, desolately, desolateness, desolatenesses, desolator, desolators, desolates, desolating, desolatingly, desolation, desolations, desolator, desolators, desolatory, desorb, desorbed, desorber, desorbers, desorbing, desorbs, desorienti, desorption, desorptions, desoxy, desoxyribose, desoxyriboses, despair, despaired, despairer, despairers, despairful, despairing, despairingly, despairs, dispatch, dispatched, dispatcher, dispatchers, dispatches, dispatching, desperado, desperados, desperados, desperate, desperately, desperateness, desperatenesses, desperation, desperations, despicabilities, despicability, despicable, despicableness, despicably, despite, despites, despiritualize, despiritualized, despiritualizes, despiritualize, despiritualized, despiritualizes, despisable, despisal, despisals, despise, despised, despisedness, despisednesses, despisement, despisements, despiser, despisers, despises, despising, despisingly, despite, despited, despiteful, despitefully, despitefulness, despiteous, despiteously, despiteousness, despites, despiting, despoil, despoiled, despoiler, despoilers, despoiling, despoilings, despoilment, despoilments, despoils, despoliation, despoliations, despond, desponded, despondents, despondencies, despondencies, despondency, despondent, despondently, desponding, despondingly, despondings, desponds, despot, despotat, despotate, despotates, despotats, despotic, despotical, despotically, despoticalness, despotism, despotisms, despotocracies, despotocracy, despots, despumate, despumated, despumates, despumating, despumation, despumations, desquamate, desquamated, desquamates, desquamating, desquamation, desquamations, desquamative, desquamatories, desquamatory, desi, dessert, desserts, dessert spoon, dessert spoonful, dessert spoons, desis, desiatine, desiatines, designment, designments, desiatin, desiatine, desiatines, desiatins, destabilization, destabilize, destabilized, destabilizer, destabilizers, destabilizes, destabilizing, destabilization, destabilize, destabilized, destabilizer, destabilizers, destabilizes, destabilizing, destain, destained, destaining, destains, destemper, destempered, destempering, destempers, destinate, destinated, destinates, destinating, destination, destinations, destin, destined, destines, destinies, destining, destiny, destitute, destituted, destituteness, destitutenesses, destitutes, destituting, destitution, destitutions, destock, destocked, destocking, destocks, destream, destreamed, destreaming, destreams, destress, destressed, destresses, destressing, destria, destriers, destroy, destroyable, destroyed, destroyer, destroyers, destroying, destroys, destruct, destructed, destructibility, destructible, destructing, destruction, destructional, destructionist, destructionists, destructions, destructive, destructively, destructiveness, destructives, destructivism, destructivisms, destructivist, destructivists, destructive destructivity, destructo, destructor, destructors, destructos, destructs, desuetude, desuetudes, desugar, desugared, desugaring, desugars, desulfur, desulfurate, desulfurated, desulfurates, desulfurating, desulfuration, desulfurations, desulfured, desulfuring, desulfurization, desulfurize, desulfurized, desulfurizer, desulfurizers, desulfurizes, desulfurizing, desulfurization, desulfurized, desulfurize, desulfurize, desulfurized, desulfurizer, desulfurizers, desulfurizes, desulfurizing, desulfurs, desulfur, desulfurate, desulfurated, desulfurates, desulfurating, desulfuration, desulfurations, desulfured, desulfuring, desulfurize, desulfurized, desulfurizer, desulfurizers, desulfurizes, desulfurizing, desulfurize, desulfurized, desulfurizer, desulfurizers, desulfurizes, desulfurizing, desulfurs, desultorily, desultoriness, desultorinesses, desultory, desiatin, desiatins, design, designed, designs, designing, detach, detachabilities, detachability, detachable, detachably, detached, detachedly, detachedness, detachedness is detacher. And that's 1,000 for today. Stopping there and see you tomorrow.